Just finished getting intimate? You have a private bathroom, clean sheets, and absolute privacy. You're lucky. Now, imagine the 13th century. Sex is a mechanical silent act performed in a straw pile, right next to a coughing grandmother and sleeping children. There is no romance. There is no foreplay. There is only the smell of sweat, smoke, animal manure, and the hope that the rustling straw doesn't wake everyone up. This is the 18-plus truth of your ancestors. You are sitting in front of your warm screen, coffee steaming, complaining about this month's electric bill. But in medieval Europe, winter was a colossal freezer that swallowed villages whole. No central heating, no insulated glass. Every morning, people woke up in a house colder than a tomb, pulled themselves from a damp hay pile, and saw frost coating their own eyebrows. You think you're tough? They lived this for months. And what they did to survive was so smart, so brutal, and so ridiculous, you'll grimace and nod at the same time. Don't look away, because trick number 3 will make you never dare to wash a wool sweater in December again. The wind shrieks. Edric's family in northern England huddles on the straw. Their bed wasn't a bed, it was a thigh-high pile of hay, packed dense into a DIY mattress. Hay was gathered all summer, bundled and saved, specifically as winter bedding. The logic was blunt: hay traps air pockets, stopping heat from leaching into the frozen dirt floor. It lifted your body off the damp, icy mud. Many families added a base layer of dry leaves or moss, then covered it with old rags or torn tunics to stop the straw from poking sensitive places. This hay pile was the 18-plus center of life. You were born on it, you slept on it, and, most likely, you would die on it. It was also the only soft place in the house to have sex, a furtive, hurried, silent act in the dark, hoping the rustling straw wouldn't wake the grandmother or the children sleeping inches away. Every morning, Adric had to fluff the hay pile. What fell out wasn't just dust. One day, it's a small mouse, finishing its own nap. Another day, it's a misplaced chicken egg. That is, breakfast in bed, literally. You've seen a memory foam mattress expand? Same concept, but with a stick and a lot of sneezing. But even with a warm back, your skin felt like it was splitting. The only thing saving it was wool and lanolin. Medieval wool was the original armor. But forget soft cashmere. Think of a rough, oily doormat. The fibers were still saturated with the sheep's natural lanolin, so rain would beat up and roll off instead of soaking in. The signature scent of this garment was damp sheep, a pungent, greasy odor we'd find repulsive, but to them, it was the smell of protection. In a strange, 18-plus way, it was a sexy smell. It was the smell of masculinity, of a provider who wasn't going to freeze. It was the pheromone of not dying. You didn't want a man who smelled like lavender. You wanted a man who reeked of sheep grease because it meant he was waterproof. And people rarely washed this wool. Which brings us to trick hash 3. A wet garment would freeze solid. One record tells of a peasant who washed his coat on a frosty day, hung it up, and it stood upright on its own. It became a crude local joke all winter, as stiff as John's winter washing. But wool had an enemy. It was a paradise for fleas. You can't wash it, so what do you do when your entire body is itching? You smoke yourself. People would hang their wool clothing near the open fire pit, hoping the acrid smoke would deter the parasites feasting on them. The trade-off? You permanently smelled like a mixture of campfire plus damp sheep. This was the medieval peasant's perfume. Can you imagine 18-plus intimacy in that context? You aren't smelling clean skin. You're smelling smoke, lanolin, and weeks of unwashed sweat, all mixed with the musty odor of the hay bed. The itch from fleas was a constant torture in your crotch, under your armpits, in your hair. But in a blizzard, a wet wool sweater still retained most of its insulating power, and that's all that mattered. The problem was, one was never enough. They mastered the art of layering, the mobile wardrobe. First, a long linen shirt down to the knees to absorb sweat and stop the coarse wool from chafing your nipples. On top of that, 1 or 2 wool tunics. Then, a sleeveless jerkin to cut the wind. If you were lucky, a fur-lined cloak. Everything was cinched with a rope belt, not for fashion, but to keep it all from falling off. Modern science says layers trap air. They didn't need a report. They had 10 frostbitten toes to teach them. The real 18 plus bodily function problem came when nature called. Imagine, you're outside in negative 10 degrees Celsius, the wind is howling, and you suddenly need to go? You have to fumble with 7 layers of clothing and belts while your hands are too numb to feel? It's a desperate panic race against time and your own bladder. Children were bundled up so much they waddled like drunken penguins, tumbling down hills instead of walking. Funny, but warm. You're warm, but the house isn't. This is where the story shifts from cold to smoke. The peasant's fire wasn't in a neat fireplace with a chimney. It was a pit in the middle of the floor, lined with stones. Where did the smoke go? Wherever it wanted. It drifted out a small hole in the roof, or just filled the room. The result? Watery eyes, a constant cough, a ceiling black with soot, and your nostrils permanently full of black stuff. Archaeologists estimate only 15% of the heat stayed in the room. 85% went straight out the hole. It was the world's most inefficient heating system. And yet, the smoke was an ally. It drove out some of the insects, the ones not living on you. It cured the roof timbers, preserving them from rot. It was a deal with the devil. You accepted a high risk of lung disease in exchange for not being eaten alive by bugs and having your roof collapse. That inefficient fire was a glutton for fuel, and firewood was a luxury. They burned anything. Old furniture? In the fire. Broken tools? In the fire. The neighbor's fence that mysteriously vanished overnight? The wind must have taken it. The ultimate survival trick was to keep a single coal alive all night, buried deep in the ashes. To lose the coal was a disaster. It meant, in the freezing dawn, you had to do the walk of shame, trekking through the wind to a neighbor's hut to borrow fire. It was a public admission that you had failed to manage your household. One anecdote tells of a man transporting a hot coal home in a hollowed-out turnip. He ran so fast people thought he was being chased by demons. No, he was just fleeing the shame of a cold hearth. The fire warmed your skin, but your stomach was empty. And an empty stomach needed a survival equation, not cuisine. The winter stew pot was a perpetual memory box, hanging over the fire all day. Morning, add turnips. Add some wild leaves. Night, add a bone. But meat was a flexible term historians have found evidence of. Questionable ingredients, tree bark for fiber, small pebbles for minerals, one hopes, and yes, boiled leather. Imagine chewing on a piece of boiled boot, trying to convince your brain it's protein. Wild herbs were the savior. Poor man's pepper, bitter leaves to mask the taste of old meat, or old shoe. It was the taste of desperation. The thing that got the whole family through the night had 4 legs. When it dropped below freezing, livestock came inside. This is the 18-plus reality of cohabitation. 30% of your living space was shared with animals. A cow generates 5,000 BTUs of heat, like a small space heater. Pigs were portable warmers. Chickens were feathered foot warmers and a very loud alarm system. Their breath added humidity to the air, making it feel several degrees warmer. Low fences were built to zone the house, but a motivated pig is a fence-destroying machine. You haven't known chaos until you've tried to eat your gruel while a curious pig snout investigates your bowl, the cow mooing, the pig snoring, and the smell of manure. You were sleeping just feet from a pile of dung, but warmth was non-negotiable. It's still storming outside, so they didn't just block the wind, they went underground. Nearly 40% of peasant homes in Northern Europe were sunken featured. They dug down 3 to 4 feet before building the walls. The earth below the frost line stays at a relatively stable 50-55 degrees Fahrenheit, 10-12 degrees Celsius. We call it geothermal stability. They called it common sense. It was a wine cellar, but for living in half house, half hole. A womb, or a tomb, depending on your view. The single door faced away from the wind. The entrance was a narrow tunnel, a dragon's throat to break the wind. The roof was a thick sandwich of straw, branches, and mud. Sometimes they'd lay turf on top, and it would grow. Goats would climb up to graze. It was a crude but effective thermal fortress. The cold didn't just attack the house, it swallowed the paths. This is where the winter toolkit came out, the snow shovel, a single, heavy piece of hardwood. No plastic. It was a CrossFit workout just to lift it. Snow scores, long sticks planted along pathways before a storm. This was the medieval GPS. In a whiteout, you just went from stick to stick. Thick wool socks were gold. A good pair cost as much as a chicken. People would stuff rabbit fur or dried moss between the layers, and they wore mittens, not gloves. They knew what science later proved. Fingers kept together stay warmer. Mut mot ngon te, vi lan kong la chuyen tuong. Anything soft, dry, and light was insulation. How did they know a storm was coming? They didn't have an app. They had a cow. The medieval weather forecast was in the barnyard. If the cows inside the house, remember them? Started huddling and cuddling, a storm was coming. When the pigs started frantically gathering extra straw, a cold snap was on its way. It wasn't the Weather Channel, but it worked. And hygiene? In winter, it was a luxury. Water froze in the bucket. They washed minimally. Wood ash scoured pots. Dry sand scrubbed hands. The linen undershirt was changed, but the wool outer layers were not. The cold locked in the smells. The smoke just covered them with another smell. It wasn't pretty. It was survival. If you agree that heating the spot is smarter than heating the lot, leave a comment below. And if you want to keep digging into these exotic survival technologies from lanolin-soaked wool to turf-covered roofs, hit like and subscribe. Next time, we'll talk about hygiene. When you got your period and all you had was dried moss, you don't want to miss it.